how do I be like more vulnerable and open about how I'm feeling and helping to articulate those in a much better way, because it does create better change.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Starts at the Top, our podcast about leading differently. I'm Zoe Amma.
And I'm Paul Thomas. Our podcast exists to help leaders and their teams to understand what they need to do differently today to prepare for the world of tomorrow. We started Starts at the Top as a podcast about digital disruption, but we soon realised that leaders were telling us something more important and urgent about how traditional ways of leading had changed forever.
We make it our mission to speak to leaders who are carving out new ways of leading, and we cover topics from emerging tech to inclusion to remote work to mental health and climate change. Basically, all the subjects that today's leaders need to be across in 2024.
Our podcast isn't about shiny corporate case studies, it's about lessons learned and the progress made the hard way, and crucially how that can inspire others.
And on today's episode, we speak to Nikki Bell, one of the co-founders of Fundraising Everywhere, the online community for professional development, peer support and networking for fundraisers and future charity leaders.
And this, I think, is a conversation that I will remember for a very, very long time, and also one that we do have to include a trigger warning for. This episode centres on how leaders best respond to death and grief in the workplace. So if you think these are topics that you would like to avoid at this time, please do be kind to yourselves and come back to this episode at a later date.
It was really refreshing to have an open and honest conversation about grief, and for Nikki to share that experience with us, and what was a very difficult time for the Fundraising Everywhere team as they worked through the illness and death of a close friend and colleague, Mandi Hine-Conway. It's really powerful stuff, and we are so grateful to Nikki for exploring this topic with us.
And before we share that conversation with Nikki, Zoe, there are a couple of AI-focused stories you wanted to share and discuss this week.
Absolutely. So we're recording this on Monday, the 8th of April, and some of our listeners might have heard on the news today that Microsoft is opening up a new AI hub in London at its Paddington office, which some people might have been to. And really one of the big stories behind that story is about Microsoft's commitment to the UK tech sector, and also how they have recently committed a really significant amount of money, 2.5 billion, to the expanded data center infrastructure, and also, I believe, a really significant amount of money to training up their staff as well. So again, this is a clear move by one of the key tech companies who's really driving a lot of the change and innovation in this space, about the need to have a UK presence and also to recruit from the AI talent pool in the UK. So it's exciting stuff.
Yeah. One of the things I said to you when you shared the story was that there's always going to be a consolidation, isn't there, at this point, where lots of innovation, lots of smaller organisations come together. And I think this is a real indication from Microsoft that they understand the sector, they understand the world that they're living in, and they are bringing those experts together and making a huge investment here. I do hope it doesn't swallow some of the smaller, more sort of innovative firms that have started this quiet revolution in the UK. I worked with one associated with the Scottish University for a while, a few years back, and there's some really, really good thinking and good people in this space. So hopefully this is the big investment that the sector needs, and hopefully we don't see too many smaller firms that are doing really interesting stuff all by the wayside, but it sounds like a good deal to me.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think it also shows that things are moving very quickly in the AI space, and the companies who are working in this area are making some big moves to indicate what their plans are going to be. So it'll be very exciting to see what they do with the AI hub, and also what the impact is on the charity sector as well.
Yeah. And I think, like everything that Microsoft do, it gets to the point where it's all about consumer AI, and I think it will be a really big shift. As soon as Microsoft get involved in this sort of thing, it's at the point where consumers have it in their hands, and we've seen this year with the launch of Copilot that everyone is trying it out now and everyone is getting involved. So it's a real sense of AI properly arriving. And I know we've been talking about it for 2 or 3 years, but with this investment and making the UK, or bringing the UK into the centre of it, it really does put a marker in the sand.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. So it'd be very exciting to see what the next steps on that are. And we'd love to hear what our listeners think of this issue as well, and what some of the consequences will be for them too. And I liked your point about how there's probably going to be quite a lot of movement in this space. I mean, I think there's such a rush now to get the right talent that I would expect there to be quite a lot of merger and acquisition activity, continuing merger and acquisition activity on any company operating in this area. So yeah, I think it will be exciting to see what impact that has on some of the companies who are operating and developing all these tools that we're all beginning to use more of every day.
Yeah. I've been away for a week and I've had clients emailing me about using AI for content generation and things like that whilst I've been away. So, yeah, it's coming really into the consciousness of nearly every organisation. As I said, as soon as it hits Microsoft Teams, and everyone's getting to experiment and play with it every day. So it's going to become more and more interesting. I think the investment as well into training looked like it was wider than just Microsoft employees as well. So I think they are making a real investment into AI skills across the board in UK business and industry. So yeah, really, really interesting. I guess watch this space in AI Corner. AI Alcove we should have as part of the beginning of this podcast.
Well, I'm sure AI could design me a very nice alcove. There are certainly a few Facebook groups I'm in at the moment around house renovations, and AI is being put to good use there by people who are doing some interior design. So I'm sure it could design us a lovely alcove, possibly with a plant in it.
And talking of applications of AI, you also included a link to a music story.
Yes, absolutely. And I included this because I know that you, like me, are a big music fan, and we're actually off to a gig together on Wednesday evening, aren't we? But ahead of that, some of our listeners might have seen that there's been a big music industry story about AI over the last few days. So Billie Eilish and Nicki Minaj have signed up amongst 200 other artists to call for tech companies to stop training AI music generation tools on some of the work that's been created by songwriters and artists. And it was interesting, when I sent this story over to you this morning, Paul, you mentioned that there was someone that you'd been following for a few years on Twitter who had some really interesting thoughts on this. So would you be able to say a bit more about that?
Yeah. So there's an artist called Holly Herndon. I think she's a US based artist, and for a good few years. So I think I started following her about 5 or 6 years ago, and she's consistently used AI in her music. So she's used AI to create, but also as a writing partner. So the way that she sees it is very much as creating a sort of a separate entity that she can work with and bounce ideas off of. She's even named it, but she's created this sort of AI that then she works with. It's a working partner, just in the way that, Lennon and McCartney might have worked together to write songs, but she's writing with the AI. And I think the challenge that I put back to you is I can absolutely see where the industry is coming from. We'll share a link to a thread that Holly Herndon has shared. I'm not saying she's the definitive voice in this, by the way, but she has some really thoughtful stuff around the role of AI in art generally, and how art and artists should be working with it and embracing it. She's not sort of going all in on either side of the argument. I think she's trying to broaden it out somewhat. So I think the basic argument is that, we need to be protective of art and artists, and AI could encroach into that space. And I think her argument is very much work alongside it. Yes, we need to be careful, we need to be mindful, but she doesn't see, AI sentience as being the bigger challenge. She sees the challenge as human beings actually working alongside and with AI to augment what they're able to do. So it's a really interesting an interesting challenge to this story, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I was thinking when I was reading that article, how would it be enforced?
I don't know. And how can you tell? I mean, I listen to, obviously we're podcasters. We listen to a lot of podcasts, and listen to Kermode and Mayo, and their producers are constantly threatening them with replacing them with AI. And one episode, they actually did an AI introduction. So it wasn't Mark and Simon, it was an AI Mark and Simon. And it did sound slightly off, but I didn't question it at all until they brought up the fact that that was an AI version of them and an AI produced intro to the program. It did sound slightly off, as I said. There was a nuance to it that wasn't quite, you could tell, but it had to be pointed out to you. And once you knew it was there, then it was obvious. But the point is, if they can replicate voices that easily and replicate words and put words into people's mouths that easily, then, you know, the future of you and I doing this podcast is entirely in question. We could just program the AI to produce episodes for us and say, to discuss these topics. It's at the point where, yeah, how do they police it? Everything would have to come with a sort of a stamp of authority, I guess, a sort of this is genuine.
Like a watermark or something.
A digital watermark, yeah.
Interesting stuff.
It will be interesting.
Yeah,
I think what we probably need is safe words and safe questions. So, you know, I know it's you and you know it's me, and the listeners know it's you and me because we know the answer to specific questions that AI just couldn't possibly know the answer to.
How do I know I'm not talking to AI now, Paul? You might still be on a beach in France and you've delegated this to your AI to come and talk to me.
I'd like to think, and nobody can see the pictures, but I'd like to think that AI would have a nice, slightly neater hair at the moment and look more presentable. But an AI version of myself would be, wouldn't make the same stumbles and mistakes that we make, would they? They'd just carry on regardless and push through.
Oh, good stuff. Good stuff. Well, it's still us, both of us, non-AI versions for now. And on that note, we should move on to our interview with Nikki Bell. And just to remind people again, please do remember this conversation covers the topic of illness, specifically cancer, death and grieving. So please do take care from this point on. And please do stay tuned for a couple of extra questions and answers at the end of this discussion that we wanted to include, but felt like they needed to be presented separately from the main discussion. We are super excited to have Nikki Bell on Starts at the Top today. Nikki has worked with charities for over 13 years and is a fundraiser turned founder, now leading the fully remote Fundraising Everywhere team. From a failed first foray into leadership over a decade ago, Nikki now works in a team of 7 and has an equity-first approach. In the past 5 years, she's navigated nearly every possible leadership challenge, including the illness and loss of a team member, unexpected bills causing financial crisis, and supporting team members to step back to focus on their personal lives for mental health or having their first baby. Nikki Bell, welcome to Starts at the Top. We're huge fans of Fundraising Everywhere, and it's a joy to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Zoe, and likewise to you and everything that you do.
Well, that's very kind. We're so lucky to have this time with you today to talk a bit about your story. So I wanted to begin by just digging into your bio a bit more. And Paul, I know there was a question you wanted to ask about leadership and Nikki's journey, so go for it.
Well, I think within the bio, if you say something like for a failed first foray into leadership, I think we probably need to explore that a little bit. And I just thought it would be useful for our listeners to hear that, you know, it's no bed of roses, this leadership lark, and actually sometimes learning from past experience can make things better the second time around. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. So I started in the charity sector about 13 years ago and was very quickly promoted into a management position after 6 months. So if you can imagine being fresh to a sector and now leading a team in an area that I didn't have any clue about. So it was face-to-face fundraising, and all of a sudden I had like these face-to-face and individual given fundraisers. And to talk about it from a leadership point of view, I was not the best person to lead that team. I definitely didn't give my best example of leadership. I was copying the kind of approaches from what I'd seen other people do. I wasn't thinking about the way that I wanted to lead a team. And that on top of the concerns that I had about, like, you know, not knowing how to do the job itself, that got pushed out into my team. I wasn't supportive. I definitely didn't know how to look after people and give them structure. And I didn't actually know how to do the job. So I wasn't able to then help people to do it. And I wasn't in that job for very long. I think I very quickly realized that this wasn't the best for me, and it definitely wasn't the best for the people that were in the team. And thankfully it was a short team. So hopefully I didn't put people off a career for life. So I took a step back and went back into a fundraiser role. And it was 100% the best thing for me at that time. And the next time that I led a team was, you know, Fundraising Everywhere, like 8, 9, 10 years later. Obviously took that learning from that time, all of the time that I had in between, to think about myself and who I was as a human and a leader. And I'd like to think that I'm in a much better position to lead people now and do it more confidently and without insecurities, and with a lot more knowledge about what it is to lead people and take them with you.
And I think it's so great you're sharing that, because when you make that first step into management and leading, it can feel like quite a scary thing, can't it? I remember making that transition myself, and how hard that was. And one of the things that made it hard was thinking about, oh gosh, everyone gets this, you know, people can start leading straight away. They instinctively know how to do it. But it's not really like that, is it? You have to learn how to do it. Leaders and managers are not fully formed from day one, are they?
Absolutely. I was really young at the time. I mean, this isn't, you know, outsourcing the blame, but I hadn't had any kind of example of what like great leadership looked at that time. I was quite fresh in my career. I'd come from organizations where I'd actually been bullied, you know, from leadership and people that I worked with, and I just didn't know how to look after people, you know. And I was so focused on just doing like my own job. I wasn't there for the people around me. They didn't have that support and they didn't have that guidance, and I retreated into myself. And that's 100% not the way to go for things if you're trying to inspire people, if you're trying to support them and encourage them. So I definitely learned a lot from that. And, you know, I have seen and spoke to those people since, and there's no hard feelings on that from either side. I think there's an understanding that we were just all in positions where we weren't meant to be there. And that obviously comes from a failure of my own as well, of going for that promotion just because I thought it was like the next thing that I had to do. But actually, you know, taking that step back and going, let's start again. Let's get this foundation right. Let's actually take the steps in the direction that I want to go in, not where I think I should be going. And I'm glad I did that quite quickly early on in my career, rather than, you know, making those mistakes now when I've got a much larger team, much bigger impact, and you know, it would have a much bigger outcome for many people.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons why we were so keen to have you on is because I've always admired your very open and generous style of leadership. And even when I was reading your bio this morning, I was thinking this is such a unique bio, because so much of it is about other people and how you support other people, rather than so-and-so did X, Y, and Z wonderful things. So can you tell us a bit more about the present day then? Can you describe the story so far with Fundraising Everywhere for anyone that doesn't know it?
So in 2019, Simon and I, who is the co-founder of Fundraising Everywhere, we were consultants at the time for charities, and we were actively involved in the conference circuit. So speaking at them, organising them, bringing people together. There was one experience I'm sure Gillian from Edinburgh Dog and Cat Home loves to talk about, where we did a workshop in a sewage plant. So, you know, we were getting around a bit and doing a bit of training. And we realised that when we were in these spaces that there was quite a lot of people weren't there. You know, they were excluded from these learning networking opportunities. So we had to talk about what we could do to change that. And that's where Fundraising Everywhere came from. Originally, the idea was that we would do a once a year virtual conference, pulling together all of these people and networks that we'd built from around the world. And we'd bring them to fundraisers everywhere, you know, through the screens at home and in their laptops. And we really quickly realized after that first one, I think it was November 2019, that there was more to do. People needed support. And of course, we all remember what happened in March 2020. So things snowballed from that point, and this kind of side project that Simon and I had come up with quickly snowballed into a lot of work that we didn't have capacity to do for ourselves. You know, I was attempting to homeschool. My son told me he was the worst teacher he'd ever had. So I was trying to like homeschool and do my consultancy and do fundraising everywhere at the same time. So we decided, right, okay, well, let's start to build a team around us. And long story short, over the past, 5 years, it's gone from me and Simon to now having, you know, the team of 7 that we have, fully remote team. We've got people in France, Ireland, based around the UK, and we have some freelancers that work with us as well. A lot of the challenges that have come from that is we never actually set out to grow a business and build a team. But on the flip side, I actually think that that's a good thing, because we haven't had to think about it too hard and too much. We've just actually had to like act in the moment. But we've always gone from, if we were working somewhere, like what would be the absolute best situation and scenario that we could build, and then give that to other people. So, you know, when you touched on the intro, with the various challenges that we've had to make from a leadership point of view, before we've even gone to, you know, your legal people, like your finance people, me and Simon have always chatted and been like, what's the right thing to do? Like, what is this next step? And then can we actually make that happen? And that's been so freeing. And I think us being in control of things has allowed us to grow something that's just felt so right, because we haven't had like these expectations, these pressures from these huge budgets and existing ways of working, or like existing plans. And that can be quite scary, but it also gives so much freedom for us as well.
Isn't it quite frightening that you don't hear that often? Everything we do is based around the right thing to do. That's so refreshing.
Do you know what, though? We've always said as well, though, that it shouldn't be the exception. Like, that should be the norm. And we've always been open to talking to people and saying how we did it. And one of the frustrating things that we found as business owners is when you go to your legal people or your finance people and they're like, oh, this is what you can do to get around this and do that. And we're like, but we don't want to do that. Like, we want to. And then we've had to like rewrite things and create new contracts and create new ways of working to actually treat people nicely, if we're going to, you know, use quite simple terms on it. And it has been so interesting, like to navigate like the world of business in just a way that it's like, well, let's just do things without thinking about like the profit part of it, or like how we can get like the most out of it. So yeah, it's been interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, as you were talking there, like Paul was saying, I was thinking about how very rarely does one hear that as a metric of success. I mean, particularly in the startup world, it's often about, I want to get to this level of profitability and this level of profitability and this amount of external investment. But I love the fact that your business is centered on, well, are we doing the right thing? Does it feel right? Are we treating people right? And that should be at the heart of all businesses, really, shouldn't it?
Yeah, it definitely. And I can see and understand, though, how other places have to operate in different settings and places. Like if we look at it simply, like we are an online platform that delivers like virtual conferences and webinars, so we can afford that like flexibility. And I understand where some places might have to have, you know, firmer boundaries, because maybe the outcome of things going wrong for them is a lot more catastrophic for us. So I do understand that we have, with the freedom that we have, it does make it easier for it, but it's not impossible to bring elements of what we do through into other places. You know, if you think about a charity leader, they have so much like responsibility on them, like not just from a team and income point of view, but like a brand and reputation, and there's so many other layers to it. So, you know, we do have that privilege of just having a bit more like creativity and freedom with it. But yeah, it doesn't make it impossible for other people. And, you know, even in trying our best and always doing the right thing doesn't always mean that we get it right for all people as well, which has been a very interesting learning and understanding for me over the past few years, especially.
So it would be great to talk about that past year, because one of the reasons why this interview came about, as well as obviously know you well as I do, as I think you put up this brilliant LinkedIn post, which was about how you grew without trying to grow last year, which I guess lines up with some of the things you've said. So can you tell us more about that journey?
Yes. So 2022 was a really hard year for Fundraising Everywhere. So it was the first year that things went back to normal, inverted comments for anyone listening to this audio only. in-person stuff came back. We were unsure about, where the future of Fundraising Everywhere was going. And from a financial perspective, we really struggled. And there was many months that me and Simon, the team, were fine because we made it so. But there was like quite a lot of months that me and Simon never got paid. So when we went into 2023, we were in a much more stable position. Things started to even out. We'd improved the relationships that we were growing across the sector, and that in turn meant more income. We had a team at full capacity, and we were like, right, 2023 is the year we're going to smash it. We're going to go international. Like, this is going to be amazing. And then very quickly, in the first couple of months, we had, those three big pieces of news. So my co-founder had to step back to prioritize his personal and mental health. We had the wonderful news that someone in the team was leaving to have their first baby, and she is back now after maternity leave. But the biggest one was around Mandi, who was, and just, for a trigger warning for anyone listening, that I am about to touch on, life-limiting illnesses and cancer, and she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and obviously, we know the outcomes of that aren't great. So we were just like, right, let's scrap this. The plan, obviously, that we had to grow, and we just stripped it right back. And we were like, if we don't do anything new this year, if we don't create extra stresses and requirements on the team, what is the absolute minimum that we can kind of bring in to make sure that we can still push out what we've promised to people and make it good quality? And we very much focused on what can we do internally to improve processes, improve service, and just really think about what our values and our approaches is going to be. So we went from this big plans to, I can't even remember what the growth plans were, to right, actually we're going to bring this back, cut it again under to what we expected, and just go for sheer maintenance. And it was really interesting because when we reviewed the finances for 2023, we actually ended up with growth anyway. And it was, scary and terrifying to go from this year of financial difficulty. I think that was in the intro as well, the unexpected bills, to going, right, okay, well, we're not actually going to grow. Not only that, we're going to reduce the targets and where we're going, but it was just so amazing to see that growth anyway that came from, from the sheer work and talent in the team, from the support of the sector, from the people that we work with. And most importantly, it really showed us where we should be investing our efforts, which is in those relationships. It's in those people and collaborating with those people that have the same approach and values as us. And it's about the team. I think that really gave them a lot of confidence and reassurance that they were working in the right place, because when the times got really hard and stretched, we weren't right, okay, 3 people are out, so now you have 3 people's extra work. It was no, we stripped this back, and that I took on all of that work really that came through from those people. Probably not the best approach. I probably should have brought someone in to cover some of that, but there was other things to focus on at the time. And this year, touch wood, crikey, I know I said it last year as well, but this year is going to be a great year for us.
And I can really hear how much you've done during that year to make everything stay on track, to grow, to look after the team. And I also know as a founder how that takes a certain amount of energy. How did you keep going through that time?
So a lot of the time, Zoe, I didn't. I actually found it, I feel quite emotional now, talking about it. It was it was probably the hardest year that I've had as a founder, as a human. Because even when you're trying to do everything right and approach everything, the way, there's always that underlying worry of, am I getting this right? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing enough? So genuinely, I don't think I did. And obviously there's probably still an element there, excuse me, that still affects me. I spent a lot of effort and time in my personal relationships and the relationships that I'd built around me for people to support. I spent a lot of time in the sea, just getting out and running and screaming into the void as often as I could. And the situation with Mandi taught me a lot as well around the things that are important, which is, how to make the world around me a better place, how to make the relationships that I'm connected with in a much better position, and how do I live a life where at the end of it, or the end of, if my time with Fundraising Everywhere, that I'm genuinely proud of what I do. So quite a lot of, time out, self-reflection, and just focusing on what's important got me through that time. But there was many moments where I definitely struggled.
Well, firstly, thank you for being so open about such a challenging year. And secondly, goodness me, well done for getting through it, because that really is multiple challenges coming from all angles, isn't it? I mean, anyone who's ever run a business, which Paul and I obviously both do, that's everything everywhere, isn't it? You've got the financial challenges, you've got the challenge of your co-founder needing a bit of time away, you've got a challenge of losing a team member, which is huge. And when we last spoke, we talked about how that had also happened in our business not so long ago. And then also you've got the extra burden of looking after the team, which, as you were saying earlier, is absolutely the right thing to do. And your biggest job as a leader during a situation like that. But that's hard as well, isn't it? When you also need a bit of support as well, very understandably.
Yeah, and I should mention as well, there were many people that got me through that time. Friends, there's people that I work with in the sector, mentors, coaches, just even people like checking in and just offering like a cup of tea, like all of that got me through. The moments where, it was a bit sketchy with the whole payment thing, there was friends that I'd made in the sector that chucked us like an extra bit of work so I could do that on the side to keep the Fundraising Everywhere thing going. So there was a lot of people around me as well that were there in those moments that showed up. And I think that and connection and making sure that you're giving back to people in those times where you're able to, and just genuinely asking for help in the moments where you need it, that was a huge thing to get us through as well. So I didn't do it alone. There was definitely people that pulled us up and pulled us through when I needed it. And investing in those circles and relationships is something I'll definitely keep doing.
And that's such an important skill, isn't it? And that's what I've always admired about you, Nikki, because you and Simon have got this really strong focus on doing the right thing and treating people right. Because of that, there is a lot of respect and goodwill towards you both in the sector. And that's why people have given you that work, because they admire what you do. They know the difference that you make, and because you really look after everyone around you. So that's really good that your friends and colleagues were able to help out, because you all have made 10 times that difference towards them previously.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear. When you work in a digital business and you are quite removed from quite a lot of the work that you're doing a lot of the time, it's easy to forget that and worry and wonder if you're doing enough, or if it's having the right impact. So that is lovely to hear. And yeah, I genuinely appreciate every person that's been there for us, since day one, yourself included. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. So I know when we spoke a few weeks ago, we touched on this subject, and we kind of bonded again over the experience that you've been through and our experience as a team when we lost Brad about 18 months ago now. Are you able to say, I mean, obviously, depending on what you're comfortable to talk about, so there's no pressure at all. But is there anything that you can share about your experience of dealing with the incredibly sad loss of Mandi?
Yeah, it's interesting because since then I've heard of a few stories from leaders in the sector through the work I do with like the Pizza for Losers workshops, where we discuss vulnerability and learning from times that we got wrong. And there was a couple of instances where someone has had a member of their team that has been diagnosed and they've lost them, and they've not felt like they've approached that situation in the right way. Or the right way for them, or the situation that they're in, because they're all very different depending on the person that you're working with. So I share this with the intention of helping people that find themselves in that situation. Because when we got the diagnosis and the update from Mandi, the first thing that I did was turn to the internet. Like, how do you look after an employee that's been diagnosed with this? And Macmillan have some fantastic resources, but I found that quite a lot of the resources that are out there are transactional. It's like, what do you do to keep your business running? Or like, what do you do for this? And it was like, well, what do we do like the other way? So one of the biggest things I would say to anyone that goes through that situation, and I hope no one ever has to, is just always keep that space there for that person. One of the biggest things that I realized and understood very early on, that for Mandi, Fundraising Everywhere and her work and her identity as a person and having that purpose, having a place for her to come and work was so important. And obviously that's, for someone running a business, I can see why there can be like a conflict of that, because if the person isn't there or able to work, then that has a negative impact. But you have to make it work. You have to keep that space there for that person, and you have to support them to be able to contribute at times that's right for them. Because I think for her in her hardest moments, this is where she wanted to be, to show that she could still do it, and show, that there was a reason to stick in and be here. As it happened at the time, the FSI, had sadly shut down, and Chapego was kind of looking for work, and she was their membership person from there. So she did come in and support us on a temporary freelance basis. But Mandi's role was always kept open. For Chapego, we kept a completely separate and more junior job title, so that Mandi always knew that there was space here for her, and she just dropped back in and out when she needed it. And I remember her saying that was something that she'd felt was, that when she'd gone in to have like our treatments and she was speaking to other people, that they didn't have that, but for us it felt like the bare minimum. And yeah, it was a tough thing to look at, but it kind of went in line with those plans that we'd had already, to just kind of step back, pull the goals back a little bit and make it work. And I remember saying to Simon, if Fundraising Everywhere goes under because we've used the freedom and capacity that we have to make someone's like final months on earth like the best that it can possibly be, then I'm completely fine with that. Like if that's what takes us out. And as it happens, that isn't what happened anyway. But it definitely, yeah, it kind of made me feel a bit more centered and calm, that we'd done the right thing in that moment, from the feedback we'd had from Mandi and her family when we'd gone down for the service. But you still wonder, don't you? Like, could I have done more? Was there anything that I could have done differently? And perhaps there would have been. But yeah, it's definitely shown me what's important when it comes to work, business, and everything else that goes with it.
It completely changes your grief, doesn't it? That's my big learning from this experience, and also other experiences of loss I've been through previously. You're not the same person on the other side of it as you were going in.
And yeah, and sorry to hear about Brad and your loss as well, because yeah, I'm not sure what I expected, because we knew what the outcome was going to be, from quite early on. And you kind of prepare for it, but then you kind of not preparing for it as well, because you kind of don't want to accept it and you don't want to make it real. But it definitely hit us harder than what I thought. Like for at least 2 or 3 weeks was just useless. Couldn't do anything. Like I had to pull out of quite a lot of commitments that I'd put myself in for. I'd spent a lot of time in bed and not able to contribute much, but it was helpful. It wasn't helpful for the team, but it was kind of supporting for the team, because we all gave ourselves that permission. We actually put up some comms out at the time saying like, we're going dark for a bit, like we're going to ground for a bit, like the next 2 weeks we're not going to be around, and we just appreciate your patience and support. And that was to the team as well. It was like, look, like here's this kind of grieving period, but there isn't like a period, obviously it continues, but it did allow us all to just like not have that distraction of work, to really like sit with our feelings and talk with each other about what we needed and what we wanted to do next. And I think it helped us like ease back into coming back and starting to make positive differences. And we were talking about what can we do now to celebrate Mandi, and that's where the Mandi Training Funded came from. And we did tribute notices at the time as well. And yeah, I think just kind of having that period to just really feel and accept and admit that we're feeling it, it really helped us move forward afterwards. But yeah, we still feel it now. We still talk about her, and when we have our get-togethers, there's still like a place for her there, and we include her. So it does still bubble up. But I think we're getting better at kind of getting through those emotions as they happen now.
I think that permission you gave your team to grieve is one of the best things you could. That's the best thing, the only thing you could have done in that situation. I think it's so important. One of the my big learnings from, you know, various losses that I have been through is that the way the Victorians grieved, you know, the wearing of the black and having those visible signals, I'm going through this big thing that's happening, is a really important thing to do, because you're creating that space. You're giving yourself that permission to say, I'm not the person I was beforehand, and I need this space to feel these feelings. And one of my regrets from that time was I didn't take any time off, and I should have. And you did absolutely the right thing with your team, you know, giving yourself the time away and also giving them the time and space away, because it's a huge thing to process. And I don't think the modern workspace is really set up for grieving. I mean, it's in a company like yours where you've done so much to work on making people feel that they belong. You've set the foundation for that absolutely beautifully. I wonder whether in the modern workplace, you know, we really talk about death in the way that is healthy, and we should do.
I mean, you did what you thought was right in that moment as well, and no one prepares you for it. You know, it's not in the setting up a business like handbook, like this is how you deal with it. But for you, that was right for you in that moment. So like, yeah, I hope that you kind of have that kindness for yourself as well, of being like, you did what you had to do. For the wider like capitalist world that is focused on like money and speed and growth, no, I don't think that there is a space for death or like death acceptance and accepting how people are feeling, or even like vulnerability and feelings. Like those words aren't common like in workspaces, and it's something that I've really had to work on over the past few years as well, of how do I be like more vulnerable and open about how I'm feeling, and helping to articulate those in a much better way, because it does create better change. It does break down a lot of barriers, and it does remove some of the sticking points that I've definitely seen in places of work where those walls and expectations are still up. I'm not sure what the answer is. I think, you know, we could talk about policies and we can talk about structures, but I actually think that every situation, especially when you are dealing with the loss of a friend or a colleague, every situation is so personal. And even if we'd had something written down about like, how do we deal with this? You can't follow that. You just have to kind of go off paper and just be like, again, what is the right thing to do? So yeah, it's a very unique experience that I hope no one ever has to go through, but we will obviously all experience it in different parts of our life as well. And I think that's why I found it quite tough. I've been privileged not to have lost anyone in my personal life for a very long time. So all of these things kind of got thrown up and had to sort them out, not just for myself, but I guess like in front of the sector, but also like whilst being strong for my team as well. And it was a very challenging situation, but also has taught me so much about myself and where I'm going and where like I want my soul to be.
And that's the weird silver lining that can come out of a situation like this, because as you describe that journey and what you've been through and the team have been through, I can see how this is a extra strength in some ways, if I can put it that way, that you've developed as a leader, because you've really learned how to look after your team during a situation like this.
Yeah, I can see that. And I hope that it gives them assurances that in those tough moments we'll make the right decisions. That's for them, both as individuals and as a collective. In terms of leading an organization, leading people, it's definitely like given us a lot more freedom. I mean, I don't know if people swear on your podcast, but do they? Can you say the F word on
For you, Nikki, we're going to give you special dispensation. Go for it.
Second, you can beep it out. But it has genuinely helped me be like, do you know what? Fuck it. Like this, if this is the right thing to do, or if this is not working, we have to let it go, or if this isn't working out the way that I wanted to, or even on days where people just aren't feeling it, it is just like, do you know what? If there's anything that we've learned from that, is that life is short. Like you do just need to spend your time with the people in the spaces and in the places that are genuinely making a difference, that make you feel fulfilled. So what can we do as an organization to create that for other people? And yeah, that's definitely been a silver lining that's come out of it for me.
And what a beautiful way.
Just saying, I'm working with someone at the moment who's I didn't have to because my mum was there, but we lost my dad to vascular dementia a couple of years ago, and I'm working with someone at the moment who's going through exactly the same illness, with both their parents, and one of the parents died before Christmas. And I think the tough thing there is that she had to leave her work in order to do that. And now we're giving a bit of a route back in to say, well, come and dip your toe in, see how you go, but always on the proviso that any moment that might have to come to an end, because she's going to have to deal with the same with the other parent. And I think that's probably something that leaders are going to have to deal with more and more, because, as you said, things were signalled. You get a diagnosis and you know which way it's going, and you learn to live with that grief before the event has even happened. And I think I gave myself a day, maybe a long weekend when my dad finally died, because we'd done all the grieving already, or a lot of not all of the grieving, but we'd done a lot of it already, because the person we knew wasn't there anymore. So it's really tough, I think, for leaders to go through that and experience it, but also come out the other side and know how to deal with it better.
And that is, I'm really sad to hear that as well. That must be a horrible situation for that person and you to have gone through, and I'm really sorry about that. And it proves, I think, like that part of it's difficult to have like a one approach fits everything for everyone. So I think if you just have like a human policy of like, how would we want this person to feel supported, and what would we want to do to give them this kind of place where they can come back to, or where they know that they can talk about it, or they know that they're looked after. But then every case will have to be individual, because it's, that impact of someone and their parents, and for yourself, like that's going to be completely different from somebody else that's, lost someone suddenly. And, there's so many like factors of it, isn't there? And yeah, it's something that we're not like prepared for, that we're not supported through, but hopefully like by people talking about it more, we can kind of share some of that and find people that can help. But yeah, but it happens to us all every day, doesn't it? Somewhere, like whether it is someone we work with, like whether it's a friend or a family member. So yeah, it's really interesting now to think about it, that there was such a lack of, I guess, like resource out there to help in those moments.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because I think that there's a lot of stuff that deals with the immediate practicalities. So things like how much bereavement leave do people get, and, how to sort of cope with some of the logistics of the situation, as it were, in the workplace. But there's less of the ongoing stuff. And I think one of the big things I've learned, I'm interested to know what you both think of this, is that it really is a work in progress, isn't it? Bereavement is one of those things where you can be fine for a few weeks and then you suddenly want to start crying in the middle of a meeting because you remember that person's like favorite cheese or something very random like that. And how it's then quite hard to say, well, I'm sorry, I need a bit of space for that, or just to sort of create the opportunity to talk about that in a way that feels safe, to be vulnerable. So yeah, I think you're right. There's not a lot of support out there for that ongoing support that people may need.
And to flag as well, I mean, there's people with pets as well. Like, and I've heard of this. So one of the people that was on our team last year, a previous place that she'd worked at when she'd lost a pet, which is like a family member. Just that support that's there for that, and it's just it's we have to think about like loss in its entirety and what it can mean to different people. And yeah, there's not one approach fits at all.
Yeah, I think the anything that impacts on your day to day and just being open and honest about what it is. I've got other people that I work with just going through sort of relatively, say, simple illnesses, but illness in itself is you're going to have to take the day off. Asking them to do it. Despite the fact that you're going to have to perhaps take on more work, just giving them that space to do what they need to do. I think it's just so important.
And for the person who's experiencing it, from my understanding, and again, speaking with people in the failure workshops that I've been running recently, they are worried about their impact on other people, how it's going to affect them, like how it's going to make them feel, either letting them down. So I think as leaders, we have to proactively put these things in place, and we can't wait to be asked for stuff. Like, we have to kind of go out there, have the conversations, find out what they need, involve them in the conversations as well. Like, it might be tough, it might be awkward, but like we have to make that happen, because again, like how we experience grief, how we experience loss is going to be completely different to the next person. So it does all come back to that conversation, that outreach, like the actually trying to like make a difference and pushing it forward, and everything else will have to fall to the side. And I think we have to be all okay with that, because it is going to happen. But again, if you do come through off the other side, because there will be people there who help to pick you up and carry you through.
And what would you say to anyone who's right in the middle of this at the moment, who might have just recently lost a colleague, a team member? What would your advice to them be?
Oh, crikey, that's a hard one. First of all, I'm really sorry that they're going through this, because it's weird and hard as a work friend or a work connection, because there's almost like this element of basically my advice would be all of this stuff that I'm about to say is completely normal. So if you're like wondering like what on earth is going on, like it's okay. So there's this like element of, where is that boundary? Am I overstepping? And like, am I doing enough? And my advice when you're thinking about that is, as long as that person knows that you're there and you're holding space for them and you're just checking in with them at regular intervals, even if you don't hear back, like that's enough. What else definitely, speak and support with the people that are around you to get that support as well, because you will be constantly thinking about what you can do to help that person, to help your team. And often like you forget in yourself, like, well, what do I need to bring that back up, and like the energy levels back up. And it's totally fine and necessary to get in touch with people and say, I just need help on this moment. And help might be something practical, like, oh, can you do this for me? Can you come for a cup of coffee? But help might also just be like space and understanding, and it's okay to ask for that as well. And that feels really weird to say, I can't do this for you right now, but can you wait? Those are two key things. And I guess my third bit of advice, because I like to do things in threes, are, as long as you are coming from a position of, I'm going to say it again, like the doing the right thing bit, that's all you can do. And you can get advice and you can get support on it. You can definitely soundboard it. But ultimately, like, if you try and do the right thing, then you're going to get the right outcome. And it's going to be really hard, and it's going to uncover all of these like weird feelings and experiences and emotions for you. And it's totally fine to like take space and work through those yourselves. But, you will all come out of the other side. And as long as you've tried to kind of make that experience better for the person who's actually going through it and experiencing the worst part of it, then that's enough for a leader.
I think that's great advice, and it's actually very life affirming talking about this stuff, isn't it? In a weird kind of way, because it's so hard. It's so hard personally. It's so hard professionally. I think the way that you are remembering Mandi is such a beautiful thing. Still saying her name, still talking about the difference she made, still creating this wonderful way to honour all the things that were important to her. And that is such a positive thing, to have come out of this really tough situation.
Yeah, and we have spoken to our husband and our family as well, and got permission as well at every point to make sure it's okay, and shared things with them, before we've shared anything publicly. And it's been really nice for them as well. We created this message board, which I've just remembered now, after we shared when we shared the news, for people to post stuff. And it was so lovely for me to read like all of these messages from people that I hadn't heard about or heard from before, like saying how she'd made a difference. So we were able to like share that with her family. And, it's typical family crack for anyone that works in the charity sector. They're like, what do you do? Like, what's your job? So it was lovely to be able to give this message board to our husband and say, like, this is what she did. Like, this is the difference that it made. And that's still there for them. So yeah, having their kind of sign off on approval and sight on stuff has been really helpful as well. And we check in with them, and again, it's kind of like, what's the right frequency? But I just come from a place of like, if I think of it and I feel like I have that need to, is it appropriate, and am I doing it for me or the person? But if it is like from a genuine space of, this is going to help, then I'll check in and get in touch. So yeah, it was still kind of like learning this post experience process. But yeah, it's obviously, you just have to remember that for them and the family, it's going to be a much bigger impact for them.
Of course. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story, Nikki. That's amazing.
Thank you for sharing all that, Nikki. It's been quite cathartic, I think, for all of us today.
I find that the more we talk about it, like, the easier it becomes. And even if one person listens to this and they help get the situation right for somebody, then that works for me. So thank you for having us on. And, it's the Starts from the Top podcast and expose more people to more leadership conversations is brilliant. So just well done to everything that you are doing as well to make the conversations happen.
Oh, thank you, Nikki.
I've had a podcast before, my first time, so there you go.
Well, we really appreciate you sharing your story and your experiences this morning, and that will have absolutely helped people out there in ways that you'll never know. I mean, maybe if it has helped them, maybe they can reach out to you, but I know it will definitely have made a difference to people out there going through similar things. So thank you so much for sharing where you're at and where you've been.
Oh, thank you. Yes, and to say that if anyone is going through it, then if I can help, just reach out. My email is nikki@fundraisingeverywhere.com. So happy to help.
Thank you to Nikki for joining us on the podcast. I'm sure you'll agree that was a really moving, really open interview, and we are so grateful to Nikki for being so honest about her experiences with losing a colleague and the impact that the death of Mandi had on their team. And it was so refreshing, I thought, to have a leader talking so openly about grief in the workplace.
I've never had to deal with it in the workplace. Obviously, both you and I have dealt with grief quite recently in our private lives, but in the workplace, I've worked alongside people that are going through quite severe critical illnesses, and luckily for me and for them, come back from those. But I mean, it was one of those conversations, wasn't it, that once we'd finished, it put an entirely different perspective and focus on the day. And I can't remember much about what I also had to do on that day, because it was just, I'd sort of been taken out of it. And I think, again, an instance of what we always say with this podcast, that what we hope we're doing is creating a space where people feel free to explore the topics that they naturally want to explore. Yeah, we send through some questions, but the questions sort of almost went out of the window with this one, and we just followed Nikki's instinct. And yeah, the honesty and the very real nature of the emotions that she shared with us, and she and the team at Fundraising Everywhere went through, I thought were really quite powerful, and will stay with me for a long, long time.
Me too. And after that conversation with Nikki, I was reflecting on how grief doesn't get talked about nearly enough in the workplace, which obviously was a theme which came through as part of our discussion. And actually, as leaders, we need to be more comfortable talking about it and modelling that behaviour, so that the people we work with are comfortable to talk about that, and also to raise some of the things that they're going through as well. So thank you to Nikki for teaching us that lesson.
Yeah, and it's in the news as well a little bit at the moment. There's quite a bit of discussion around pet grief and stuff. Nikki mentioned it at the end of the conversation. And I think what was my biggest takeaway is that what we shouldn't do as leaders or people in business is define other people's grief for them. You know, we had an incident very, very, very close to the death of my father, where our cat was run over and killed, and that, because of the immediacy of what happened versus the long drawn out battle my dad had with dementia, almost felt worse in a way. It was so instant and so shocking, and had such an impact on us as a sort of a young family, that I don't think that can be overlooked. But it was so hard that day, the same day, going into work meetings and saying, look, I might be off my game today because this has happened. And almost seeing in the eyes of some of the people that you're working with that, what do you mean? It's just a cat. Well, I'm not going to define that grief for anyone. I think for us, it was, he was more than a cat. He was a member of the family. And I think that's the sort of thing that you just can't legislate for, and you shouldn't try to define for the people that you're working with. So yeah, I think it was a really interesting discussion, and one that I was just proud to be a part of. Actually, I think it was a really, really good defining moment for this podcast. And thanks very much to Nikki for sharing that.
100%. Thanks so much, Nikki, for a great discussion. Very inspiring as so far.
As always, we really do appreciate that you've listened all the way through to the end of the episode. So thank you very much for that. You can support the podcast by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to us. It really does help us to reach more people. So if you've enjoyed what you've heard today, do share us with a friend.
And thank you so much for listening today. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks with a brand new episode of Starts at the Top.
See you then, and bye for now.
Bye for now. See you soon. Paul, I think you've got a couple of quick questions to share, haven't you, from your WhatsApp group?
Yeah, Richard Sped was asking about you've started to do in real life conferences now, and what sort of led to that development. Do you think hybrid can be an equal experience to what you've been delivering so far?
So interestingly, we were meant to start the in-person stuff last year, but that was one of the projects that we put on ice when we tried to. When we approach things with a stripped back approach. And the idea with the in-person events, they're not conferences, they're more kind of just really quick opportunities for people to come together and meet in person, because virtual as a medium is brilliant. It's a really fast, effective way to reach many people with great content in one go, but most importantly that they can get it at a time that's right for them, because we do have this huge on-demand library that people can dip into. But what we wanted was for an opportunity to take some of those relationships that they built online and actually bring like a human element into it, because the human element and connection is still important. And even when we started Fundraising Everywhere in 2019, we always said this is not to replace in person, it's to enhance it. So we brought the IRL spaces together, the in real life spaces together, to just bring our community together in one room for like an hour and a half, say thank you, give them a really quick session and just make them feel inspired, and then send them on their way with like a face to the name of the people that they'd gotten to know online. So that's the intention behind them. But I think hybrid conferences and any opportunity where more content and resources available to more people is great. And we've always kind of pushed for in-person conferences to have that online element. But yeah, our kind of main focus will always be online, with these like little pocket of satellite in real life spaces for people to just come and feel a bit buzzed for a bit and feel connected, and then crack back on.
So I've known you for 55 minutes, and I could have probably preempted the answer to that question with it's the human touch, isn't it? It's the human side.
Yeah,
of it.
That's a short answer.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And then the second question was from Rory Traynor of the Starlight Children's Foundation, and he's asked for 3 things, but I'm just going to ask you for 1 because we're short on time. But if Nikki had a magic wand, what one thing would they change about the sector immediately?
Ooh, Rory, that's a really good question. You could have prepped me with that one. One thing that I would change, it comes down to it being a more equitable place. So, we've talked a lot in this podcast around death and grief and experience and loss, but there's so many, there's so many people on a daily basis that are experiencing hardships on much different levels, much more impactful, directed to them, backgrounds. And I think if there was one thing that I could change around that, is to make it a more equitable space and place for people to feel safe, to be vulnerable, but most importantly to actually like come to their job and enjoy that and feel like they belong. And that's rooted in lots of other things that might be connected to Rory's other questions. But yeah, if there was one thing that I would change in it, it would be around equity and all of the things associated with that. And there's lots of great people having great conversations about changing that, which I'm sure you've covered and will cover on this podcast as well.